Yeah, I think we'll get started. So thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to this session. Like I say, we had a really good response to this. This is really around, as you say in the title, is CVAD-as-Code. So looking at DevOps for images and infrastructure. And kind of reason this came about was lots of conversations I've had with a lot of the customers that I deal with. And I primarily focus from a Citrix perspective on our financial services customers, primarily based in the UK, but obviously a lot of those are global in nature. So I'm a pre-sales solutions architect with Citrix. Been with Citrix about 4 years now. Previously worked in our consulting team. And some of the conversations, particularly over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, have been around applying sort of DevOps principles to Citrix environments. There's various different kind of approaches and discussions I've had with many of our customers and many of you on the call today around your approach to this, how you're approaching this, what's Citrix position, and it feels like it's evolving for a number of our customers and some slightly different approaches and slightly different principles that are being applied when we talk about sort of Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops primarily as code and how we manage that and deploy that. So that's the reason why we've set up this session. And I contacted Pat, who's recently joined Citrix about a year or so now. Pat?
Yeah, about let me see, 13 months.
Yeah. So and we're lucky to have Pat. Pat's as you can tell from his accent, he's got you can sense some English Midlands accent there, but is based in California. So it's 8 a.m. where he is. So very lucky to get Pat to join us on this session. So yeah, so I think that's it for me really. Enjoy the session. If you're not speaking, please go on mute. Feel free to post any questions in the chat if you'd rather, or I'm sure there'll be some discussions as we go through Pat, and we'll open up the floor for comments and conversations. I know a lot of you are looking into this area and doing different things in this area, so probably got some good experience you can feed back into the group.
All right, thanks, Neil. So let me just share my screen. Thanks for joining, folks. My name is Pat Patterson. I am the Director of Developer Evangelism here at Citrix. So I joined about a year ago, and that is actually a new post at Citrix. And I'm new to Citrix technology, so but I've had, I don't know what now, 14 years working with seven. Oh, bit of echo there. Can you mute if you're not me, please? Yeah, 17 years working with developer communities. So I was originally a developer myself. Back in the 90s, I was coding 16-bit Windows, 32-bit Windows, Java. I always say I served a 4-year sentence in product management after I joined Sun Microsystems. And then I worked with the open source community on their single sign-on technology, so what was called OpenSSO at the time. I later moved to Salesforce, learned an awful lot at Salesforce about developer evangelism and software as a service, platform as a service, and spent a few years at a startup. And as I mentioned, I've been here at Citrix for about a year now. And feel free, I am a lightning rod for the community, so feel free to email me, hit me up on Twitter. The address is right there. Okay, let's get started. So what are we going to be talking about? I'm going to guess that most people are familiar with the basics of DevOps, so I'm not going to spend much time there. Then I'm going to talk about different approaches that I've seen to people implementing CVAD-as-Code. This kind of, if you step back and the different things you can do using a kind of DevOps approach to CVAD. Talk a little bit about the declarative versus procedural approaches. This is another kind of split that we see between the way that people work. And then I'm going to go a little deeper into CVAD and talk about some work I've been doing recently there and how that might pan out. So, and then I've got some resources at the end that should be useful to you. And this is a relatively small group. I think it's still about 20, 25. If there are questions that you want me to cover at the end, then pop them into the chat. It's kind of difficult for me to present and see the chat at the same time. But if there is anything pressing, if there's anything I say that just doesn't make sense, feel free to unmute yourself, and yeah, you can heckle at your leisure. Okay, so DevOps, I think we all probably know by now, it's a combination of software development and IT operations. And the goals here, you know, there's several goals, I would say. One is obviously shortening the systems development lifecycle. You know, this has been the holy grail since computers came about, and also improving quality and predictability. And really, that's where I see a lot of benefits of this approach. And you know, if you go online and search for, you know, definition of DevOps, you'll probably find 50 different documents. I've just called out some of the key areas that I feel are important here. Like the one obvious one is automation. You know, it's creating scripts that handle repetitive tasks so that we not only save time, but they are more predictable. Things happen in you know, a fixed order, and you can parameterize them, and you can bring up machine after machine, and they're basically identical. And that all depends on tooling. So, you know, you can't have DevOps without supporting tooling, and I'll talk about some of those tools in the next hour or so. And then you have the concept of something as code. So we talk about configuration as code, images as code, infrastructure as code. And this is another crucial aspect, because when you reduce something to code, you're really making it more controllable. You're making it amenable to version control. So in a way that it's, you know, you might have in the olden days, you might have a PDF runbook that describes how to set up a system, starting with, you know, get your Windows 10 image and then apply these features, make sure it's fully patched, and then install this software. You know, a human can do that. It's not terribly interesting. It's not a good use of our time. And it's also pretty error prone. That, you know, humans will go for a cup of tea while something's happening, come back, skip a step, realize what they've done, you know, do the skipped step at the end. And have you ended up with the same result that you wanted to? It's kind of can be questionable. And, you know, we get into this, I love this saying of cattle, not pets, that, you know, servers used to be these wonderful cosseted systems that were brought up by hand and tended, and, you know, they fed the updates and so on. And really like pets, you know, we had names for them, like, you know, Nimrod and Kestrel and things like that for our servers. And really the aim is that they should be more like cattle. You know, we should be just be able to bring them up, you know, at the tap of a button or on a schedule, and they should have names like, you know, ABC 10924, where you know, they really, you know, if one dies, we're not going to cry about it. We're just going to bring up another one in its place. And all of this combination, one of the outcomes that we want to see, as well as improved quality and predictability, is continuous delivery. And so a lot of these DevOps techniques have their origin at internet scale enterprises like Google, Facebook, where, you know, they sprang out of necessity. You cannot have, you know, 100 front-end servers and be, you know, tending them as if they were unique special snowflakes. So let's focus in a little bit on CVAD-as-Code, and I'm going to talk about 3 specific areas here. You know, images as code, it's a fairly well-worn path now. I've seen a few conference presentations on the topic. There are pretty mature tools there. Configuration as code is another area where there exists, you know, Citrix tooling in the form of the automated configuration tool. And then I'm going to get into infrastructure as code, which is where things get really interesting, and we're kind of out on the edge of what exists right now. So when we talk about images as code, the key tool is Packer. Now, Packer is a tool from a company called HashiCorp, and they'll come up pretty often. They're a pretty industry-leading company in DevOps, and Packer lets you create golden images. Now, the really nice thing is that you can describe your image in terms of, okay, it's got to have, this version of Windows 10. We've got to install maybe the Citrix VDA and so on and so on. And you can have that description, and then you can cut images for multiple platforms from that single description. So that's really powerful. That means that if you've got, say, some on-premise systems, some systems in the cloud, you can have a single description of your golden image and build it multiple times to target wherever you want to deploy it. And nice things about Packer, it's pretty lightweight. You can run it from your laptop without a problem, and it's open source. So it's a tool that we can take advantage of. And it's almost like we're in a golden era of software development. There's so much online available that we can just download and try out, and if it works for us, we can then go make a case for using it in our organization. So Packer is kind of oriented around this process, and it's really pretty straightforward. Packer will launch a machine. So typically, it might be in a public cloud. I guess you could probably do it like on VMware if in your local infrastructure. And then it can go through a sequence of various steps. And so you might install software. You might run some scripts on the machine. You might copy some files. So maybe you want to copy the latest version of the installer from the vendor's website, and you can reboot the machine during this process. And you can basically compose these steps in any order. So, copy the installer down, run installer part 1, reboot the machine, run installer part 2. It makes it very straightforward to automate that. And then ultimately, you're turning that living machine into an image, your golden image, that you can then stamp out any number of times. And and this kind of captures this idea of, well, we've now encoded this into a document that we can put under change control and apply it again and again, or even parameterize it and say, okay, well, this element of the script is actually an environment variable that we can change between different builds. So if we want say different language versions of Windows and everything else to remain the same. And there's some terminology. Really, the core idea is the template, and that defines your build. So one template, again, can define one or more builds because it can target multiple platforms. It can have parameters and all that kind of thing. And then your build is the actual task that creates a particular image, and Packer will run multiple of these in parallel. So this is really nice. You can change something in your template and say, okay, make this for all the languages of Windows that I'm going to support, or run this for images in GCP, Azure, and AWS. And then you've got all of these various components that support the process. So you have different communicators that can interact with the machine over SSH or WinRM. You've got provisioners that can install and configure the software. You've got those different builders that create the machine images. And the reason I'm calling those out is that they are components that there are multiple options. So that gives you this extensibility and this richness within the system. And you can actually create your own. So if you had some strange requirement, you could create your own provisioner, for example, or if you could create your own builder. And then the artifacts are the ultimate output. So in a kind of a local case, that might be a directory with one or more files containing the image, or it might just be the AMI tag within Amazon. So those bits sitting in Amazon aren't really the artifact. It's the tag that you need to get to them that Packer is going to spit out at the end. Now, I am not an expert on Packer. We have many people in the community who know infinitely more about this than I do. And one of them is Ryan Butler. So he's a consultant in the US with a company called Ahead. And so he always introduces himself as Ryan Butler, consultant with Ahead, which, is fairly obvious from this slide. And he did a session at our Converge conference last November. And I'm going to talk about Converge again later, but I'm going to pop over to, oops, not that one. So if you go to the URL I showed there, and I will give all the URLs to Neil to share with you all. This is his GitHub project, and he has a link to the video of his presentation there. And he has like this whole worked example of using Packer to create golden images. And he's using Azure DevOps as well. But what's nice is we can dip into here and have a look at his, this is his template, and get an idea of how this works. So it's not rocket science. It looks pretty intimidating with all the curly braces and colons and commas. But we've got a bunch of stuff in the environment here. So, client ID and secret for accessing some API, the Azure storage account here. So, these are the things that if you were doing this manually, you'd kind of need to have these written down or in a file before you started. And then we're using the Azure ARM builder. So this is going to actually kick off that initial starting machine from, let's see, this thing here. So it's going to be Windows, Microsoft Windows Server, and the image SKU. So that, again, this is a parameter that comes in. So you could do this multiple times with, different SKUs for the particular Windows image you wanted to start with. And then it's going to put it in a location that you specify there. And then if we scroll down, we can see that there's a number of steps that are going to take place. So we are, let's see, pulling down some something from GitHub there. And then it looks like we are running some Ansible. So that's another tool for working through a series of steps. We are restarting the machine. So super powerful. You can just restart the machine and carry on, which is difficult to do if you're, just putting a script on the machine itself. And then we're doing the first stage of the install for the VDA, restarting it, doing the second stage of the install. And it kind of carries on like this. So you can see here how at the end of this, you've got a consistent image based on the variables you fed it at the beginning. And believe me, for doing this once, this is probably more work than sitting there and creating the image yourself. But as soon as you do it the second time and you can just start this and walk away and do something else, the payoff is almost immediate. And we can go into the scripts that Ryan provides here and kind of get a flavor of what's going on. So here he's saying, okay, I'm going to test whether this thing is there. If it isn't, I would, to be honest, I would have put these the other way around. So the one that happens first would be first, but that's a minor style thing. So if the thing's not already there, we download it. So we're getting it out of a blob there, and then we start the install process. And we'll have it'll exit with this code 3, I guess, to say reboot needed. So the main that template says, okay, reboot the machine because this thing finished. And then it says, oh, it's here now. I can resume the install and run it. And then it's going to complete. And then Packer will go on with the next step. So this is a really, really nice worked example of exactly how you can do this process. And I encourage anybody who's interested in images as code to start here and work forward from there. Now, there's a total cop out. So yeah, Ryan did all my work for me in that section. Configuration as code. So this is where we actually have the automated configuration tool. Okay, so images as code is a generic, it's a generic IT concern. There doesn't need to be a specific Citrix tool to do that. So it's great that Packer exists, and I would say take advantage of it, because there's no reason for Citrix to build its own thing that duplicates that. On the other hand, with configuration as code, we have created the automated configuration tool. Now, that will effectively reach into a running CVAD deployment and extract the configuration. Now, no matter how you built up that configuration, whether it's like been lovingly evolved over several years, or you created it yesterday using some tool, it doesn't really matter. ACT will reach in, scrape out every piece of configuration there that describes that CVAD site, and serialize it as I think it's JSON. Now, we're into the land of code here now. We have a tool that will reach into a running system and serialize its configuration. And so that allows us to do many things. So one of the original motivations for ACT was, hey, we want people to be able to take their on-premise CVAD deployment and try it out in Citrix Cloud with CVAD service. So that's one of its use cases. But it turns out that as soon as you can serialize that configuration into a file, you get loads of other possibilities that open up. So disaster recovery is an obvious one. If you periodically serialize that configuration, it makes it much easier to bring up a new system that mirrors the old one, and also synchronizing across different stages. So the usual kind of chain of dev, test, staging, prod. You can be sure that what you did in dev is what ends up in prod, but at the same time, control those little differences like host names and that kind of thing that you actually want to change in a controlled way. And again, as soon as it's realized as code, we can archive that configuration and edit it. And this is an interesting point here. Okay, what's the difference between extracting this configuration into a format like JSON and just pulling it out into some binary format that might be more efficient to deal with and take up less storage space? Well, binary formats are really hard to edit. But as soon as you have some configuration in JSON or YAML or any other more or less human readable language, well, assuming developers are human, it's amenable to editing and parameterization, and a whole host of possibilities open up. And so most of what I've talked about so far is we call a declarative approach. So with a declarative mode, you're really specifying what you want to achieve, and you're kind of describing the end state of the system. And this is really well suited to infrastructure, and Terraform, that I will be speaking about in a minute, is very oriented towards this, describing the desired state of the system. And to a lesser extent, Packer, you can look at Packer as almost being like a bit of a hybrid tool, in that there is kind of like a sequence of steps, and you do have scripts in there that are a bit more procedural. So in a procedural approach, you're kind of saying more how you want things to happen rather than what you want to end up with, because you're defining that sequence of steps quite explicitly. And this really lends itself to automation. So not everything is infrastructure, right? Not everything you can just say, oh, I want this system and it has to have these attributes and make it so. Sometimes you've just got to do things in a particular order, and you have to bring up this thing and then that thing, and then you've got to do this operation and you've got to do something else. And the tools there are tools like Ansible and a little older tool, Chef. And I would say there shouldn't be any dogma about this. There shouldn't be any sense of, oh, I'm going to try and do this in a declarative way, because that's really a more pure approach to DevOps. You should really just understand the different approaches and pick the appropriate tool for the job. And one thing you often find is that, the declarative approach, the tools have to have much more intelligence, because they have to analyze the current state and the desired state and figure out how to reconcile the two. Sometimes that is, beyond the capabilities of the tool to figure out. Whereas the procedural tools are often a little bit simpler in that they leave all of that to you. But then, of course, your task is more difficult, because you have to actually define that sequence of steps. So it's important to understand the task at hand and the capabilities of the tools there. All right, so infrastructure as code. So I'm going to say that it's another HashiCorp product. Terraform is the tool I see most often here. And again, this is really oriented around defining the desired state of the system. And they have a very rich infrastructure, well, a very rich ecosystem rather, over 1,000 providers. So these are plugins for Terraform that target a specific platform or service. So there's a provider for AWS. So you can describe in a file that you want a particular network group and a particular VM. So, you say the size of the VM, you want a particular image on that VM, and you can basically describe the desired state of your infrastructure. And Terraform really nicely gives you like variables within the description, so you can say, okay, server 1 is going to be like this, da 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 da, and as it's running the script, Terraform will substitute in, the IP address or the the Amazon instance ID, whatever's appropriate for that kind of tag that you use in the script. So it's a very rich configuration language they have called HCL, HashiCorp configuration language, that you can end up with. You can build an entire system from these templates. And again, it's open source, and you can download it and play with it. And they have it. One thing I will say, as a developer evangelist, HashiCorp have excellent tutorials on all of this, and I was able to, I've been working with these tools for a little while now, and when I started, it was very, very easy to get started. Great news if you're on the networking side, app delivery security, because we do have an official Terraform provider for Citrix ADC, and that is published into the Terraform registry with all the hundreds or even thousands of other providers, and maintained by the engineering team. You can see there was a version published 13 days ago. I captured this screenshot yesterday, and that's all very lovely. But what about CVAD? Well, there is not. Oh, can you mute if you're not me, please? Or you're not asking a question, of course. So right now, there is no CVAD Terraform provider, but stay with me. So the nice thing about CVAD service is it has its REST API. And, I lifted this description: automates the administration of resources within a virtual apps and desktop site. I lifted that straight from the CVAD REST API page. So what does that mean, given that we already have the CVAD SDK? Well, it provides broadly equivalent functionality. If you've used the CVAD SDK, You know, a lot of what the REST API does will be very, very familiar. You won't have any trouble using it. You know, there's trade-offs though. It's accessible from any programming language, any operating system. So anywhere you could make an HTTP call, you can call into the CVAD REST API. But you know, if you look at equivalent scripts in with the SDK and the REST API, using the API is pretty wordy. You know, if you use it from PowerShell or Python, you will probably end up with about 4 or 5 times more lines of code to implement the exact same functionality, just because you're using a lower level interface. You're assembling the payload, making a REST call, and parsing the response. So there's a trade-off there. You know, the SDK is great and very concise, but PowerShell, Windows only. But the REST API does give you great flexibility. And I actually have written a tutorial on getting started with the Citrix Cloud and CVAD REST API. So again, this is an URL that I'll provide to Neil to distribute to you. And this really walks from first principles. So if you've not used a REST API before, but you know a bit of PowerShell or Python, this will really get you started authenticating to Citrix Cloud and then calling some of the simpler cloud APIs. So, okay, you know, tell me about my resource locations, tell me what services I can access, and then goes into a worked example of a script to iterate through the machines in a CVAD machine catalog and reboot any that have no active sessions. So one of those tasks that you could do interactively, it'd be really boring to, like, you know, scan through for any machines with no active sessions and reboot them. And it's perfect for a script of about, I can't remember, 50 lines or so to kind of do that kind of repetitive work. So highly recommend if you're not a REST expert to take a look at that. And then I did a webinar with CUGC on understanding the differences between the SDK and the API. So I can go into more detail there and actually work through the same series of tasks in the PowerShell SDK, PowerShell using the REST API, and then Python using the REST API. So I'll go into quite a bit of detail in the trade-offs and the back and forths there, and, you know, exactly, you know, the corners of functionality that you can do from the SDK that you can't do from the API. So highly recommend that if you're kind of if you know the SDK and you want to get understand those differences. And that's a CUGC webinar, so you do have to be a CUGC member. It's free and takes about 30 seconds to sign up, and I highly recommend it. If you're not already in CUGC, they have, I want to say, 3 or 4 webinars a month, and it's very much community based. They let me in to present webinars, but most of it is presented by Citrix admins and consultants sharing their knowledge. So it's a great resource, and I don't think enough people take advantage of CUGC. So anyway, go to that URL and you'll see the description of that webinar, and you can sign up there as well. All right, so enough slides. Wow, that's a lot of slides for me. Let's get into the demo. So what I did was, in preparing for this session, I started to look at how I could actually get started implementing infrastructure as code for CVAD. So I actually have an embryonic Terraform provider, and there are people I know in the community. As one of the CTPs, Patrick Van Born, is keen to collaborate on this, and I'm going to work with Patrick and also the CVAD product team to see how this can go forward, and I'll talk a bit more about that at the end. But this is basically the boilerplate code for creating a Terraform provider. It's a language called Go, but that's not really too relevant. But what it basically lets us do is, you know, say, okay, I need a customer ID, a client ID, and a client secret to work with the API, and it lets us get those and set up a client. And what this does is it kind of provides the glue between a very declarative description of CVAD configuration and actually making those API calls. So, and I'll walk through this just so you understand what's going on here, because there's a little bit of magic in the mix, but the actual steps are pretty straightforward. So this is my CVAD infrastructure as code, and you will see that it is extremely minimal. Okay, this is as far as I've got because I've been working on this for 2 days. So, you know, at the top here, we say, okay, I'm going to be using this provider, and it's this one that I've cooked up, and it actually happens to be sitting on my machine. And we have this, this is Visual Studio Code, by the way, which has a plugin for working with Terraform scripts. So I get nice little descriptions here. This is the resource block. So this describes something that I want Terraform to create for me. So this happens to be the minimal set of attributes you have to provide for creating a machine catalog. So this says to Terraform, okay, this is a CVAD machine catalog. This is the kind of thing that I'm going to create. And then this Mac is just a name that I'm going to refer to it later on in the script. So here, I took the decision here to provide the site ID here in the resource rather than, you know, rather than figure it out dynamically. I might change that. But then here are the, you know, the golden 5 attributes for creating a machine catalog. I don't have to kind of describe these too much, but, you know, in experimentation, this is the minimal description you have to provide to create a machine catalog via the API. If you miss any one of these out, it'll just fail. And then what we're saying here, so if I ran this script with, you know, just this, it would create it and it would be there. But then this output block says, I want you to actually show this to the user. So again, we have just a name there. And then, okay, the value of what we're going to be outputting is one of those CVAD machine catalogs, and it's the one that I call Mac up here. So this is really nice because now we get the ability to just, you know, describe how we want this to turn out. It's pretty understandable. We can put this into version control. We can have many more than one resource in here. We could have machine catalogs, machines, hypervisors, any of the resources that exist in CVAD can ultimately be described in a file like this, and you can have multiple providers. So you could have you could be bringing up the machine catalogs and so on in Citrix Cloud, and you could use the AWS or Azure provider to bring up virtual machines in Azure, and then start installing the VDA there. You know, it's a bit laborious to create this stuff because it's not actually that exciting or sophisticated. You know, what we've got here is an embryonic Go SDK that can communicate with the API. So the client here authenticates using, you know, the client ID and secret. It does that OAuth thing, and then it saves the token that comes back because it's going to need that. And then, you know, it's got a low-level request thing that just does some HTTP, and then it's got, I just wrote create, update, create, read, update, delete. So they're not in any particular order, but update sends a patch to the URL there of whatever the description you have in JSON, and then we have create does a post, get does a get, and there's one up here. There's delete is up here. I don't know. Delete's probably at the bottom here. It's really short. There, delete uses the delete verb. And then these are used. There's another layer of glue here. It's all very modular. This is, I basically just followed the example here to say, okay, so my machine catalog resource, so this is what's defining what can happen here, has to have several attributes. So this is schema. So you have to list out these. And this is what I mean. It's laborious. Like, I think there are actually tools that can do this from the API definition, but I did this by hand. So I just did the 4 that I absolutely needed. And then again, this kind of just does the marshalling from those attributes into a catalog structure that then goes off to those APIs. So there's really no rocket science here whatsoever. It's literally glue code that is just marshalling data from this format into the API calls. But the marvelous thing is now that we can, let's see, let's go back there. So this is my initial state, and I have this on my machine here, and it's just, you know, exactly what you saw. And I can say, okay, so let's do git init. So I'm going to put it under version control, and I'm going to say Terraform init. So this initializes Terraform, and it actually creates some files here that Terraform uses to keep up with the changes. So I can say, okay, so git add dot, and then git commit init -m. So I'm adding the code into Git, and now it's under source control. And what I can do is bring up my first machine catalog. So I do, let's see, Terraform. First of all, I can do Terraform plan. So this is really useful. This Terraform looks at that description and tells me what it's going to do. So especially if you have like a big complex template there, this is really, really useful, because this tells you exactly what's going to go on. And if it was more complex, you know, it would have a whole series of outputs here. And, you know, you see these IDs. When I create the catalog, it's going to know what that is. So, you know, that knowledge is in the system. And it says, I didn't save the plan, so Terraform can't guarantee it's going to happen exactly the same next time. But so you can actually say, okay, tell me what's going to happen and save that so I know that that's all you're going to do. But I'm going to say Terraform apply. And what it does now is it reads that. Oh, I should have used the option to skip the interaction. It uses that description, and it looks at what's already in CVAD, and of course, oh, it timed out. Okay, let's just do that. Is it gonna break again? The curse of the demo. I can reset all this if the wheels fall off easily enough. Great. Okay, so it said it added one resource, didn't change or destroy any, and we have, it tells us that it created a machine catalog with this ID, and as anybody could predict at this stage in the demo, I'm going to go here, and bear with me a second. And the marvelous thing is that you won't see my credentials, even though I have to log in. And it doesn't matter if I logged in before, because I would have timed out by now. And if you can guess my long password there and get there really quick, then you can use the numbers that you'll see and totally impersonate me. Where is it now? I've got like 20 of these things in the Authenticator app. 078493. Verify. I should be in Citrix Cloud, Cambridge Science Park. Come on. These spinny things never spin fast enough for my liking. Grab a tea. All right, so I can go into my virtual apps and desktops there. And let's see. Do some more spinning. It's always good doing this live on stage, because I can do a kind of little dance as I'm waiting for it to come up. And then we want full configuration, because we want to get that raw list of machine catalogs. Come on. Did I click it too soon? Have I messed it all up? Full configuration. Come on. You're going to work now. Chrome on my machine, for some reason, after the last Chrome update, it's just not good. Like just random little pauses as it's doing things, thinking about things. I think the web was faster when I first used it in 1993. Okay, so if we go into the machine catalogs, yay, we can see test run Terraform. I really should have shown you this catalog before where that didn't exist. So I can go in there and I can see all of its stuff, and it's created and it's ready to put machines in. Now, every icon looks the same these days. Okay, so the really nice thing is I can say, okay, we don't want random allocation anymore. We want static allocation. So I save that. I go back to my terminal, and I might say, okay, well, I want to see what changed. And let's say git commit -am, and it was change allocation. And then I can do Terraform. Let's do, hang on. If I do, I can do Terraform apply auto approve, so we don't get the prompt. And the really nice thing now is it just looks at the change in what I want, figures out what the current state is. Not sure why it's timing out. Dodgy Comcast internet service. But anyway, if it can see the, there we go. So it recognized that there was a machine catalog there. It knows the ID, it knows the significance of that ID field, and it knew to call the update API to change it, and results in the updated machine catalog. And we can say UK Financial Services rocks. I am absolutely not going to put an exclamation mark there, because that would be just a total hostage to fortune. But there we can make it kind of a bit more obvious and say, okay, let's do apply again. Well, actually, let's do the git thing. So change name, just so we've got that bit of history, and then we'll do the Terraform apply, and it will do it again, and hopefully do it a little bit more quickly this time. Yay! And now that's a nice obvious change here, so I can just go in and refresh this and see that UKFS rocks. And then if I decided, of course, that is not actually what I wanted to do, I can say, oh yeah, who messed that up? And it's all in change control. I could do the diff and see where that happened, and I can say git checkout back to this state, and that rolls my files back. And then I can say Terraform apply. So it's important to note that Terraform doesn't do any of the version control, rollbacks, or anything else. So it's a specific tool for a specific job. You use the tool you use, whether that's Git or something else, to do that rolling back. But what I did was I rolled it back with Git to that configuration before somebody mistakenly changed the name. And now it's changed back to what it was. And I go here, and this thing is going to say test from Terraform. So this really is, for the considering what you have to define in Visual Studio, which is very mechanical code that is, just wiring together, these things to the REST API concepts. It's doing a lot for us. Terraform as a tool is doing a lot in figuring out what it needs to do in terms of adding, changing, and destroying resources. And then, in a bigger example, wiring them together so it would use, say, the ID of this machine catalog in adding machines to it. So you could define a resource file template that had a machine catalog and then a bunch of machines, and that you would just refer to the machine catalog as Mac in the machine descriptions and say just Mac ID. and that would wire them together automatically. So you don't have to go through stepwise, create this first so you can get its ID, and then create this using that ID. This will just kind of rattle through everything and wire it together automatically. So that is, and like I say, this took me a couple of days to figure out. The current status of that work is, I think experimental is probably dignifying it a little bit. It works on my machine and it creates machine catalogs, and you get 4 degrees of freedom in the attributes you can express. But it's a proof of concept. It's a, it's a demonstration that this actually works and works pretty well. It's possible to, generate a Go SDK automatically from the CVAD Open API specification. That's going to be my next step. So I don't have to write that whole thing by hand, because that would be really dull and laborious given the number of properties you can pass in when you create a machine catalog or anything else. And then look at filling out more resources, because just creating machine catalogs is not that useful. And then down, I'm going, I'm like you're basically seeing the sausage being made now. I'm going to talk to CVAD product management and some folks in the community, and I'm actually involved in the open source process here at Citrix. We're actually reworking our open source processes so we can better publish and collaborate on this kind of project on GitHub, because this is a kind of project where you could get to the 80% coverage that was enough for it to be useful, and then kind of make that available in a kind of in a kind of early access, beta, whatever you want to call it, 0.1 release, and kind of then iterate on the corner cases and so on to turn it into something that was production strength that you wanted to bet your career on, but still have it out there to experiment with. So yeah, let's go to questions before I kind of wrap up with a plug for my events and staying in touch and all of that good stuff. Have I stunned you all into silence? Oh, we've got something in the chat. Let's go look. Let's go look. All right, so scrolling up. So Cyan Door, how to create a VM using ARM Packer Terraform. Understood. How to create machine catalog in CVAD via Terraform. Understood. Thanks. This is new. Great. Questions. Okay. When rolling out CVAD, the VDA appliance, how do we orchestrate the rollout of the appliance? How do we configure the appliance so that they can belong to different sites, different network segments, point to different storefronts, etc.? Do you have examples? I do not have examples, but the principles are pretty much contained in what I've talked about. The key here is using those different tools together because they're very complementary. So it's not like a question of I've got this big task to do. Am I going to use Packer to do all of it, or Terraform, or Ansible? You need to step back and say, okay, well, I can use Terraform to bring up this infrastructure, and I can use Terraform to bring up that VM, and then I'll use maybe Ansible or Packer to actually roll that VDA onto the VM to turn it into the VDA system. So because that that two-step install with grab the installer, start it installing, wait till it's done, reboot, run the installer again, that's a great example of something that's that desired state of having VDA installed it's not the right task for Terraform. That's where you'd want to use maybe Packer to create a VDA image, okay? And then once you've got that VDA image, then it's amenable to Terraform because you just say, oh, I need a VM and start it with this image. Or you could say, you could take it the other way around and say, okay, Terraform's going to bring up that VM, and then maybe Ansible is going to take that point Ansible at that particular machine and run through a series of steps to turn it into the VDA. So don't have examples, but that's kind of where I'm going with this. So we have the the developer ecosystem team at Citrix. I'm the only evangelist, so I kind of I have this role, and within the team we have different specialties. So my specialties are in the kind of the product line direction, it's CVAD, and in the kind of we've got different focal areas. Mine is DevOps. So this is at the intersection of what I do. So this is something I'm kind of keen to push forward, and I'll have this is all no promises. This is what I do. Is I work in the intersection of community and their product teams, but this is something that I think I can push forward with encouragement, support, some amount of involvement from the product team. But like I say, it doesn't rely on any magic knowledge of the internals of CVAD. It's a bunch of glue code, and that anybody that got as far as I did can kind of help move this forward. Okay, so the other question is, when rolling out Citrix PVS? Okay, so I know what PVS stands for. I'm not an expert, but let's have a look. IIS server, let's say we need Packer provisioner and installed PVS software. Don't think there is any other way. How do we configure the new PVS server as code? Okay, so Cyan, that second question about PVS, I have not been into PVS, but I'm sure if Neil will take a note of this, and this will be in the recording somehow, then we can probably get an answer for you there. I do know one thing. The one thing I do know about PVS is that we just rolled out the public preview of PVS on Azure. And so you have a lot of new stuff to play with there. Okay, are you aware of any limitations of the CVAD provider? Yes, because it is a toy right now. It creates machine catalogs with 5 essential attributes and no more. So it's extremely limited, but my intention is that it will evolve into a fully featured way of doing infrastructure as code with CVAD in the way that the Citrix ADC Terraform Provider can do it over on that side. Can you clarify the meaning of VDA appliance? Oh,
yeah. So
okay.
that was a question.
That was your question. Going back, so that's that's the with
no, it was from Cyan's question. Yeah. So he's talking about the cloud connector there rather than I think on that there are some automation based around PowerShell of auto configuring and deploying the cloud connector. So that can be configured as an automation rollout. I mean, the cloud connector is fairly lightweight and doesn't have a great deal in terms of options on install. So I suspect that probably be.
I would definitely encourage you to go through the article, that Converge session and the GitHub repository from Ryan, because he works through that in some detail. So and he's a really good presenter, very, very knowledgeable guy. One part of my the great thing about my role, and you can ask Neil, I can literally talk about what I do all day, and I did it for an hour on a podcast, and we'll share that podcast with you as well, because I'm sure you're all fascinated by what I do. I haven't lost the sarcasm when I moved to the US 17 years ago. So the great thing about what I do is I'm balancing always technology with communication and community and connecting people. So it's better for me to point you at Ryan Hunter as an absolute expert on image as code for Citrix than it is for me to spend a year getting up to his level of knowledge and doing it myself. A lot of what I do is just connecting the right people who need to kind of exchange information. Any other questions on the chat, or indeed by voice?
The question around PVS as well, as you say, it's recently been released, PVS into Azure as tech preview. So, but it looks like you've installed via answer files. which would be obviously the sort of traditional on-prem mechanism of installing PVS or automating the install of PVS through answer files. I'm not sure if there's an alternative to that with the cloud option yet, but I will double check that.
Yeah, and the public preview is there, so I encourage you all to dive into it. There was a blog post about that and the image portability service on the Citrix blog just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. So let's go back to the slides. Okay, so just one final call. Anybody got any questions by voice or chat before I start?
I did see a raised hand go up. I don't know if that's...
Oh, feel free to come off mute and talk to us. Don't be shy.
Well, one question for the audience, really. Are there any tools that you're using or anyone out currently using Packer and Terraform for their CVAD deployments?
We should have done some polls.
Yeah.
Everybody's super quiet.
So
raise a hand if you do. Oh,
yeah, Neil, we're using Azure Image Builder, which is fundamentally based on Packer, but it is obviously the Microsoft SKU of that.
Cool. All right. Okay, well, Citrix Converge. So I mentioned this earlier on in that Ryan presented that session at last year's Citrix Converge. Converge is our developer conference, and when we say developer at Citrix in terms of our community, we use it in a very, very broad sense. So when most people hear the word developer, they think of those folks who sit in darkened rooms working in IDEs all day with C# or Java, and you slide them pizza under the door and that's what they do. Those are, for technology vendors, that's what our engineering teams look like. And they're actually the minority of Citrix's technical users. So we call them coders. Much more prevalent in our community, and I would guess most of the people here are scripters. So this is the audience segmentation. So I have to do a bit of marketing. It's unavoidable, even though I'm an evangelist and I don't market to technical professionals because you can't. But we use some of their concepts, and so we when I joined Citrix, I looked at, okay, this is our audience. How do we talk to them? Well, we have this great body of scripters who can write PowerShell and Python, maybe. They have deep knowledge about virtualization, about maybe networking and so on. But writing those scripts is not the be-all and end-all of their life like it is for coders. So they might write some PowerShell to automate some repetitive task, and they might spend, I don't know, an hour or two a day on average wrangling SDKs and APIs in scripts. And so we have to talk to those people in a very different way than we talk to the coders. You can't, the same messages and even the same iconography does not resonate with those folks who, describe themselves as admins, architects, DevOps engineers, rather than developers or coders. And then we have builders where you're using low-code or no-code tools to create a business application that for the end user is pretty indistinguishable from something that was built by more traditional means. So that might be micro apps in the Citrix workspace, or Podio, Salesforce, where I used to work, looked a little bit like that as well. You could define some schema, define some business logic using very simple formulas, and come up with something that solved a real business need, and you hadn't really gotten involved with semicolons and curly braces at all. So yeah, so popping back up the stack, when we talk about our developer conference, that's really what we mean. It's like anybody that's doing anything with Citrix apart from just running the console and typing numbers in boxes and making sure the number corresponds to what it should do over there. You're all developers in our eyes. You're all building on our APIs and SDKs, and you're building your artifacts, your scripts, your automations, your your Terraform templates based on our technology. So it's going to be a virtual conference across 3 days, 3 tracks. So virtual apps and desktops, app delivery and security, and work solutions, which work solutions includes Workspace, Podio, Write Signature, Share File, anything else I haven't mentioned, and it's free. So great event. Last year we had about 60 breakout sessions, I think, plus keynotes and some panel sessions. So really worthwhile. You can register right now. We haven't started to kind of push the registration, but registration's open if you want to kind of just get it done and make sure you'll kind of receive the update emails and the everything as the conference comes to fruition. The URL is there, and again, I'll give all the URLs to Neil to send to you. And we opened the call for papers, call for proposals yesterday. So if you are in a position to share your expertise and experience with the rest of the community, just go to that URL. It's got much more information about Converge and a theme and the tracks and what we're looking for. And it'd be great to have you on the program. We're going to have a balance of, Citrites, so Citrix, maybe product managers, SEs, solution architects, kind of sharing the inside view with folks from the community, so customers, partners, consultants, and so on, sharing that kind of view from the trenches at the sharp end. Because my job is great. It's not marketing, it's evangelism, and it's sharing what we're doing at Citrix with you, and it's bringing back your experiences to the product teams and saying, hey, we need to improve this experience in a very transparent way. So we actually want those sessions that say, here are the boundaries to how this works right now, and here's how I got past them to deliver what my users needed. All about the authenticity, and now you can tell I've been living in California. And then finally, please do stay in touch. I shared my personal email and Twitter handle right at the beginning. So I finish by directing you to our various channels. So we're on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. The stuff you might expect arrives there. We've got a huge bank of content on YouTube. So all of the sessions from Converge last November are there. So there's some great content, as well as Ryan talking about golden images. I think Guy Leach presents a session, some of the star CTPs, really passing on some great knowledge there. And we also have a monthly newsletter. So I would really encourage you to sign up for this. It comes out once a month, and it is targeted technical news. Again, we call it the developer newsletter. It's really for anyone interested in the APIs, the SDKs, the public tech previews. That's a great way to just stay up to date with what's happening. We post events in there as well. So just one email a month, and I curate it myself. It doesn't come from technical marketing or anything. It's all relevant stuff. There's about, I'd say, 5 or 6 items in each newsletter. So basically a link and a paragraph on why that's useful to you. So I will leave that up. And is there anything you'd like to do to wrap up? Oh, do you want me to turn over control to you? Do you have a closing slide you need to show or anything?
No, I don't, Pat. No, that's been a great session. Thanks for delivering that. I appreciate your time. If there are any further questions from the audience, I think with the take up, it'd be good to do a follow up session, see how it's developed.
Yep.
Maybe.
I'm always interested in what you folks need to know, what you want to know, techniques, areas that you want to know more about. A lot of the time, this webinar was a forcing function for me to sit down and get to grips with Terraform and figure out how it could play nicely with CVAD. And yeah, that's basically a year into Citrix. That's my life right now is, oh, I'm committed to talking about this. I kind of have to know something about it. But, you know, I tell you what I know, and I connect you with the people who really know what I'm talking about.
That's been really good. I don't know if somebody's come off mute. Is that you, Danny? Did you have?
It was me. I was going to say it's a familiar feeling. Just be the front man and then go find the experts in the background somewhere. But no, great session. Thank you, Pat.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, Cyan says, looking forward to more awesome news like this. I wouldn't class this as awesome news. It's awesome potential. Okay, don't go hitting on your rep to say, hey, where's that CVAD Terraform provider I saw Pat talking about? So, you know, this thing has been in existence for precisely 2 days. So this is embryonic. And but, you know, that newsletter actually is the way to keep up with evolution there. And, you know, if I can get it to somewhere where it's broadly useful and get it into GitHub, and like I say, one of the CTPs, Patrick van den Born, is keen to collaborate on this. And we are, coincidentally, we're kind of spinning up this process to allow community members to have input to our GitHub projects. I'm trying to make it all kind of come together at the same time. But I'm nothing if not ambitious.
That's great. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, really timely for a lot of the conversations that we're having with a lot of our customers. And I know, you know, a lot of the people that are using Citrix in anger out there are certainly having these conversations internally as well. So
yeah, and if you're interested, actually, if you're interested in collaborating on this, get back to me as well, and that's useful to know. And don't go hitting up your. Oh no, I mean, I was going to say, Neil, I'm just waiting for the first email saying, hey, when's that thing going to be ready? I've got like $2 million of business riding on it. So we can all make jokes at the expense of the SE on a call like this. All right.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your attendance. Really appreciate you taking the time out to join the session. Thanks, Pat, for the rest of your day.
Yeah.
Or we finish off and sign off.
Absolutely. All right.
Cheers.
Later.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.